The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan was a weapon. It was a suffocating blend of suffocating perfumes, the metallic tang of expensive champagne, and the low, predatory hum of 1,000 whispered conversations. The clinking of crystal flutes sounded like distant, breaking glass. Here, in this cathedral of new money and old power. Reputation was the only currency that truly mattered, and it was traded with the cold, merciless efficiency of a stock exchange floor. Marcus Washington stood at the epicenter of this gilded storm, a man apart. He wore a custom Brioni tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, its midnight blue fabric absorbing the light from the chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations above them. He was to be the evening's main event, the recipient of the Vanguard Philanthropy Award, a testament to the work his foundation had done in revitalizing underserved communities across the country. He nodded politely as a senator's wife gushed about his latest inner-city tech incubator, his smile a carefully constructed mask of graciousness, but his eyes, dark and profoundly still, scanned the room, searching. They found their target standing near the main stage, holding court, David Klein. Klein was the senior vice president of private wealth management at First National Bank, the gala's primary sponsor. He was a man carved from ambition and privilege, his face a blandly handsome canvas for the smug satisfaction he radiated like body heat. He laughed, a loud, braying sound that cut through the ballroom's hum, and slapped a hedge fund manager on the back. To the casual observer, he was the picture of corporate success. To Marcus, he was a ghost from a life of ash and smoke, a life Marcus had spent 3 decades trying to outrun. As the ceremony began, Marcus took his seat at the head table. The bank's CEO, Robert Morrison, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in a state of mild, prosperous contentment, delivered a glowing introduction, a man whose vision is matched only by his generosity. Morrison droned on, a true titan of industry, but more importantly, a titan of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Marcus Washington. A wave of polite, sustained applause washed over the room as Marcus walked to the podium. He felt the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes on him, analyzing, judging. He adjusted the microphone, his movements economical and precise. He began his speech, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that filled the vast space with an authority that had nothing to do with volume. He spoke of opportunity, of bridging divides, of investing in potential where others saw only risk. His words were a direct reflection of his life's work, a mission born from a past he never, ever spoke of. When he finished, the applause was genuine, even enthusiastic. As he stepped down from the stage, a line of well-wishers formed, and at the front of that line, with a smile that did not reach his cold, blue eyes, was David Klein. Klein extended a hand, his grip firm and proprietary, a truly moving speech. "Marcus," he said, his voice a smooth, corporate purr, inspiring, truly. "Thank you, David," Marcus replied, his expression unreadable. Klein held his hand a second too long, his thumb pressing just a little too hard against Marcus's knuckles. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was nonetheless meant to be heard by those nearby. "It's remarkable how some people can rise from the ashes, isn't it?" The words hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. The air in his lungs turned to ice. The glittering ballroom, the smiling faces, the distant music had all receded, replaced by the smell of burning wood and the taste of soot. Klein's thin smile widened, almost as if the fire never happened. The coded reference, meaningless to the senator's wife and the tech billionaire standing beside them, was a perfectly aimed poisoned dart. It was a reference to a shared, traumatic history, a night of flames and screaming and ruin that had defined both their lives, sending them hurtling down two violently different paths. For a single, eternal second, Marcus felt the white-hot rage that lived like a caged animal inside him strain against its bonds. He wanted to shatter the calm facade, to see the smug confidence on Clean's face curdle into the fear he so richly deserved. But 3 decades of relentless, punishing self-control held him fast. His expression did not flicker. His posture remained relaxed. He slowly, deliberately, withdrew his hand from Clean's grip. He met Clean's gaze, and in the dark, still depths of his eyes, Clean saw not anger, but something far colder, something that felt like an ending. "Some of us carry the heat with us, David," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a prophecy. "It serves as a reminder." He then turned away, a polite nod to the next person in line, leaving Clean standing there with his thin, victorious smile slowly fading, a sudden, unfamiliar chill prickling at the back of his neck. The war had been undeclared for 30 years. Now, in the heart of polite society, under the light of 1,000 crystals, the first shot had just been fired. The penthouse apartment on Central Park West was Marcus Washington's sanctuary. It was a world away from the suffocating opulence of the gala. Here, the air was clean, scented with the faint, comforting aroma of old books and freshly brewed Ceylon tea. The lighting was soft, the colors muted earth tones. The only sound was the whisper of the city, a distant, rhythmic breathing 30 floors below. This was his fortress of solitude, the one place where the mask could come off. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private study. The city lights spread before him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He had loosened his bow tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone. In his hand, he held a heavy crystal tumbler containing not alcohol, but cool, still water. His reflection in the glass was a study in contrasts, the impeccable tuxedo, a symbol of the world he had conquered, and the haunted look in his eyes, a relic of the world that had almost destroyed him. Almost as if the fire never happened. Clean's words echoed in the warm, book-lined quiet of the room. They peeled back the decades, stripping away the layers of success, the billion-dollar portfolio, the philanthropic accolades, revealing the terrified 16-year-old boy covered in soot, watching his family's future burn against the night sky. A soft knock came at the study door. "Come in, Elena." Elena Rojas entered, her expression a familiar mix of fierce loyalty and gentle concern. She was his general counsel, his closest confidant, and the only person on earth who knew the full story of the fire. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She carried a leather-bound folio. "I saw the live stream of the gala," she said, her voice soft. "You handled Clean with your usual restraint." She used the word carefully, knowing the volcanic effort that restraint cost him. "He's getting bolder," Marcus said, his gaze still fixed on the city below. "He thinks enough time has passed. He thinks he's untouchable." "He is the senior VP of one of the largest banks in the world," Elena reminded him gently. "In his world, he is untouchable." She placed the folio on his polished mahogany desk. "The final documents for the Omnicorp merger. They need your signature before the markets open in Asia." Marcus turned from the window. For a moment, he was no longer the haunted boy, but the master strategist, the titan of industry Morrison had described. His focus shifted with an almost audible click. Any last-minute complications, None. Their board approved the final terms this afternoon. It's a clean acquisition. This will make Washington Capital the majority stakeholder in the largest sustainable energy portfolio on the continent. She watched him, her head tilted slightly. This is the culmination of 5 years of work. Marcus, you should be celebrating. Celebration is a luxury, he said. Walking to the desk, he picked up a $1,000 fountain pen, its weight familiar and comforting in his hand. We'll celebrate when the work is done. Elena knew he wasn't talking about the merger. The work was a 30-year obsession. It was the driving force behind his every acquisition, every investment, every philanthropic donation. It was all part of a long, intricate game of chess. And David Klein had just unwittingly moved his king into a vulnerable position. As he signed the documents, his hand steady and sure, the memory he'd been suppressing all night broke through. It came not as a linear story, but in a torrent of sensory fragments, the acrid smell of burning tires from the auto shop next door, the brilliant, terrifying orange of the flames licking at the window frames of Washington and Klein Community Goods, the frantic shouts of his father, the sound of David's mother screaming his name, and a final, searing image David Klein. Then a skinny 17-year-old, standing across the street under a streetlight, his face illuminated by the inferno, his expression not of horror, but of something else, something cold and watchful and unnervingly serene. His pen paused for a fraction of a second. Marcus Elena's voice was sharp with concern. He blinked, the image receding. He finished his signature with a flourish. It's nothing. Just tired. He closed the folio and pushed it back toward her. File it. And Elena. Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. I need to visit my safety deposit box at First National. Elena's eyebrows rose. The one downtown. At Klein's branch. She didn't need to ask why. That box contained the only surviving physical records from the old business, the original partnership agreement signed by their fathers, the insurance policy that had been declared void, the fire marshal's inconclusive report, the artifacts of a betrayal. There's a document in there I need to review, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. A loose end. This isn't wise. Marcus, she said, her tone pleading. You're letting him get to you. After 30 years. You're walking into his territory. Why now? Because he invited me, Marcus replied, turning back to the window. The city lights seemed to blur, transforming into a million tiny embers. He reminded me that some accounts are still unsettled. It's time to make a withdrawal. Elena sighed, recognizing the immovable resolve in his voice. She knew this was more than a reaction to a public slight. It was the reopening of an old, unhealed wound. And she feared, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it would bleed. The next morning, the lobby of First National Bank's Manhattan flagship branch was a temple to Mammon. It was a cavern of Italian marble and polished brass. Its cold, imposing architecture designed to make the individual feel small and insignificant in the face of institutional power. The air was sterile, chilled to a precise 68 degrees, and carried the hushed, reverent tones of a cathedral. Marcus Washington walked through the heavy glass doors, deliberately dressed down. He wore simple, dark-washed jeans, a well-worn but clean gray Henley, and a vintage leather jacket that had molded to his frame over years of use. On his wrist was his Patek Philippe, a watch worth more than the teller's annual salary, but its quiet elegance was lost in the deliberate simplicity of his attire. He carried a weathered leather briefcase, the same one he'd used in his 20s when he was building his empire from nothing. It was all a calculated choice, a test. He wanted to see the system unfiltered. He approached the VIP counter, a velvet rope separating it from the general banking area. A young woman with sharp features and an even sharper platinum blonde bob looked up from her computer screen. Her name tag read, Jennifer Hayes, branch manager. Her eyes did a swift, dismissive scan of Marcus's attire, and her polite smile became a thin, professional veneer. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone implying the answer was likely no. "I need to access my safety deposit box," Marcus said, his voice calm and even. "Of course," she said, her smile tightening. "Do you have your key and 2 forms of government-issued identification?" Marcus placed the heavy brass key on the marble countertop, followed by his driver's license and his passport. Jennifer picked them up with 2 fingers, as if they might be contaminated. She typed his name into her system. Her expression flickered for a nanosecond. The system would have flashed a Tier 1 client alert, a digital flag of his immense importance. But she had already made her assessment based on his clothes. And cognitive dissonance was a powerful force. She chose to believe the computer was lagging. "I'll need a moment to verify this," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. She turned to a teller at the next station, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, and whispered something. Sarah glanced over at Marcus, her lips curling into a subtle sneer. Jennifer returned. "Sir, for security purposes with a premium box like this, we require additional verification. Do you have a recent utility bill or a pay stub to confirm your address and employment?" The request was absurd, a clear deviation from standard protocol designed to be an obstacle. "My address is on my license," Marcus stated flatly, "and the monthly fee for the box is automatically debited from my primary checking account. With this bank." Jennifer's polite mask began to slip. The man wasn't behaving as he was supposed to. He wasn't intimidated or flustered. He was calm. It was unsettling. "That may be," she said, her voice gaining a condescending edge. "However, with the rise in identity theft, especially among clients from certain emerging demographics, we have to be exceptionally careful. It's a matter of protecting our clients' assets." The microaggression was delivered with surgical precision. Emerging demographics, a corporate-approved euphemism for people like you. "I appreciate your diligence," Marcus said, his voice like ice. "Now, please grant me access to my box." Sarah Mitchell, the teller, sauntered over, emboldened by her manager's stance. "The thing is," she chimed in, leaning conspiratorially on the counter, "our VIP clients are typically business owners, executives, people we know. We find that some customers are sometimes more comfortable with the streamlined services at our 125th Street branch. It's a matter of cultural fit." It was the second time in less than 12 hours that a First National employee had tried to put him in his place. The rage inside Marcus, the caged animal, stirred. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing it back down. He had a goal, a purpose. Losing control was not an option. "My business is conducted from this branch," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "Box 4729. I need access now." His quiet intensity seemed to rattle them. Jennifer exchanged a nervous glance with Sarah before tapping a button on her desk phone. "David Jennifer Hayes down in the lobby. We have a situation at the VIP counter. A gentleman is being insistent about a high-security box, but his credentials seem questionable. Yes, I think your presence would be beneficial." Marcus stood perfectly still, his briefcase in hand. As he waited, he knew Kleena would come. This was the moment he had been engineering since the gala. The confrontation was not going to be in a ballroom, surrounded by their peers. It was going to be here, in Kleena's domain, on his turf, where his power was absolute. The doors to the executive elevator hissed open, and David Kleen emerged, looking every bit the regional manager. His suit was impeccable, his stride confident. He saw Marcus and his face, for a fleeting moment, registered surprise, which quickly hardened into a mask of practiced disdain. He had seen Marcus in a tuxedo last night. Today, in jeans and a leather jacket, his preconceived notions snapped firmly back into place. "Jennifer, what's the issue?" Kleen boomed, his voice echoing in the marble hall. "David, thank goodness," Jennifer said, her voice dripping with relief. "This individual is claiming ownership of Box 4729, but refuses to comply with our enhanced security protocols. Sarah and I suspect potential fraud." Kleen's eyes raked over Marcus, the same cold, dismissive assessment from their youth. He saw not a billionaire philanthropist, but the son of his father's failed business partner. He saw a ghost from the gutter who had somehow, inexplicably, clawed his way into a world where he didn't belong. And now, that ghost had dared to walk into his bank. "Sir," Kleen said, the word an insult. "I am the regional manager. My staff's word is final. If they say you haven't provided adequate documentation, then you haven't. I have provided my key and 2 forms of government ID," Marcus stated, his voice a low counterpoint to Kleen's boom. "Your staff is creating arbitrary and discriminatory barriers to service." Kleen laughed, a short, sharp bark of derision. "Discriminatory, sir. We have protocols to protect our real clients from people who look to take advantage of the system. People like you." The phrase hung in the air, thick and poisonous. This was it, the culmination of 30 years of resentment, jealousy, and perceived injustice, all distilled into one ugly, public moment. The personal had become professional. The past had invaded the present. "I see," Marcus said softly. He reached into his briefcase, but not for more identification. He pulled out his smartphone, its screen glowing to life. He tapped on the First National Bank Private Wealth app. His finger hovered over the screen. "I am closing my accounts with this institution," he announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent lobby. "All of them. I will be initiating a wire transfer of my liquid assets to a competitor. Immediately." Kleen stared at him, a flicker of uncertainty warring with his deep-seated arrogance. "You're bluffing," he sneered. "You probably don't even have an account here." Marcus simply turned the phone screen toward Kleen. The main summary page was displayed in stark black and white. "Client Washington. Marcus L. Relationship Tier 1. Founders Circle Total Assets Under Management. 847 392 156.73. The number was so large, so incomprehensible, that for a moment, Kleen's brain refused to process it. He squinted, his face contorting in disbelief, then dawning, sickening horror. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. Jennifer Hayes gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah Mitchell looked as if she'd seen a ghost. "Now," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than any shout. "If you will excuse me, I have a transfer to initiate." He tapped the screen. The war had officially begun. The first counterattack came less than 24 hours later. It was swift, insidious, and aimed directly at the heart of Marcus's empire. Marcus was in the sterile, pressurized silence of the Washington Capitol boardroom. A sleek, minimalist space overlooking the concrete canyons of Wall Street. He and Elena were finalizing the press release for the Omnicorp merger, a deal that represented the pinnacle of his legitimate, public-facing success. His phone buzzed, displaying the name of Kenji Tanaka, the CEO of Omnicorp. "Kenji," Marcus answered, a note of warmth in his voice. "I trust you've seen the final wire confirmation. A pleasure doing business with you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Kenji spoke, his voice was strained, heavy with an unease that was entirely out of character. "Marcus, we have a problem. A major problem." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Explain." "Our primary lender for the expansion phase of the project has just pulled our line of credit. All of it, effective immediately." "That's impossible," Elena interjected, leaning closer to the speakerphone. "You have a binding agreement. They can't just pull it." "They invoked the Material Adverse Change Clause," Kenji said, his voice grim. "They're claiming that the merger with Washington Capital introduces unforeseen reputational and financial risk. It's complete nonsense. Marcus, and you know it. We've been banking with them for 20 years. This came out of nowhere." Marcus's mind worked with the speed of a supercomputer, processing variables, connecting dots. Who is the lender? Kenji. First National Bank. The name landed in the silent boardroom like a stone. Elena swore softly under her breath. It was Cleany. It had to be. This was his retaliation. He couldn't attack Marcus directly. Marcus was too insulated, his finances too diversified. So he had attacked his new partner, using the full institutional weight of the bank as a bludgeon. It was a classic power play. Sabotage the deal. Make Marcus look like a toxic asset, and punish him for the humiliation he'd suffered. "Stay calm, Kenji," Marcus said, his voice a steady, reassuring anchor in the sudden storm. "He's trying to spook you into backing out of the merger. Don't let him. Washington Capital will cover the credit line ourselves. Send me the paperwork. We'll have the funds transferred within the hour." "Marcus, that's over $1 billion in liquidity," Kenji said, stunned. "You can't just—" "I can, and I will," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is no longer just a business deal. Consider it a personal guarantee." After he ended the call, the boardroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the air circulation system. Elena stared at him, her expression a mixture of awe and alarm. "He's declared all-out war," she said. "This is beyond a customer service issue. He's leveraging the entire bank to hurt you. He's risking federal regulations, shareholder lawsuits. Why? Why would he take such a massive, reckless risk over a personal slight?" "Because it's not just a slight," Marcus said, his eyes distant. He walked to the window, looking down at the river of traffic flowing far below. For him, this is 30 years of perceived injustice. He thinks my family's success was built on his family's ruin. He's not just trying to win a corporate battle. He's trying to burn down my world, just like he believes my father burned down his." "You can't know that for sure," Elena said softly. "I can feel it," Marcus replied. He turned from the window, his jaw set, his eyes hard as flint. The strategist was now fully awake. The time for quiet, controlled anger was over. He has used his institution as a weapon. Now, I will use my resources as a shield, and as a sword. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from a secure, encrypted app. The man who answered on the second ring had a gruff, no-nonsense voice. "Sully, I have a job for you." Sully, real name Arthur Sullivan, was a former investigative journalist who now ran a high-priced corporate intelligence firm. He was discreet, relentless, and possessed a moral flexibility that made him the best in his field. "I need everything you can find on a man named David Clean, Senior VP at First National Bank. I don't want just his financials and his corporate history. I want his life, where he grew up, who his parents were, where he went to school. every house he's ever lived in, every skeleton in every closet. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he dreams about at night. I want the full picture. No stone unturned. That sounds personal, Sully grunted. It has become personal, Marcus confirmed. And Sully, start with a fire. A commercial fire in the Bronx. About 30 years ago. A business called Washington and Clean Community Goods. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Understood, Sully said. You'll have my preliminary report within 48 hours. As Marcus ended the call, he met Elena's worried gaze. While Sully digs into Clean's past, we'll attack his present, Marcus said, his voice cold and precise. I want you to draft a letter to every member of the First National Board of Directors. Inform them, politely, that Washington Capital is beginning a systematic divestment of all our pension fund holdings in any company where First National acts as a primary underwriter. It will be a quiet, slow bleed. They won't notice it for a week or two, but their portfolios will start to underperform. They'll get nervous. They'll start asking questions, and all those questions will lead them right back to their hot-headed senior VP, David Clean. This was the war he knew how to fight. Not a war of overt aggression, but one of silent, overwhelming financial pressure. A war fought in the hushed tones of boardrooms in the cold. Hard numbers of a balance sheet. Cleany had thrown a punch. Marcus was about to dismantle the entire foundation he stood on, brick by invisible brick. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled aggression, while Elena's letters were quietly making their way to the inboxes of the most powerful people in finance. Marcus began to receive Sully's reports. They came in encrypted files, a slow, steady drip of information that began to paint a dark, pathetic portrait of David Clean. The first file contained the basics. Cleany was drowning in debt. His lavish lifestyle, a house of cards built on a mountain of personal loans, second mortgages, and maxed-out credit cards. He was living far beyond his means, desperate to maintain the facade of wealth and power his position demanded. It was a weakness, but it wasn't the motive. The second file dug deeper, into the past, and with it came the flashbacks, dredged up from the depths of Marcus's memory. He was 16 again. The air in the Bronx was thick with the smell of summer asphalt and exhaust fumes. Washington and Clean Community Goods wasn't just a store. It was the heart of the neighborhood. Marcus's father, James Washington, was the optimist, the visionary, a man who believed in building ladders for others to climb. David's father, Frank Clean, was the pragmatist, the numbers man, a good man worn down by a life of perpetual struggle. They were partners, friends, their families intertwined. Marcus remembered stocking shelves with a young David Clean, their shared laughter echoing in the small space. They were friends, or something like it. But even then, there was a darkness in David, a sharp-edged envy he couldn't quite hide. He resented Marcus's easy confidence, the way James Washington looked at his son with such pride. David's own father was a man of quiet sighs and disappointed glances. Then came the night of the fire. Sully's report included a digitized copy of the fire marshal's investigation. Origin inconclusive. Evidence points to possible electrical fault in adjacent auto body shop, but extensive damage prevents definitive conclusion. Marcus didn't need a report to remember. He remembered being woken by his father's shouts. He remembered the heat, the suffocating smoke. He remembered his father running back into the burning building, not for the cash box, but for the ledger books, the proof of who owed what, so the community wouldn't be burdened by debt in the aftermath. James Washington emerged moments before the roof collapsed. His arms burned, his face black with soot, clutching the precious books. A hero. Frank Clean, however, had crumbled. He had no insurance. He'd let the policy lapse to save money. He had no records. He had nothing. The fire destroyed him, not just financially, but spiritually. He died of a heart attack 6 months later, a broken man. The last part of Sully's report contained a grainy photo from a local newspaper article about the fire. It showed the two families standing amidst the smoldering ruins. James Washington, his arms bandaged, stood tall, his expression grim but determined. Beside him, Marcus, his face streaked with tears and ash. And a few feet away stood David and his mother, their faces masks of hollow-eyed despair. They were the victims, the Washingtons. Through some miracle of fortitude, were the survivors. And in that moment, in the eyes of a grieving, 17-year-old David Cleaney, survivor was just another word for betrayer. The final piece of the puzzle, the keystone of the entire 30-year vendetta, arrived in Sully's third email, with the subject line, "The Twist." Attached was a scanned copy of a deed transfer. 2 years after the fire, James Washington, having used the saved ledgers to rebuild his reputation and secure a small business loan, purchased the now vacant lot where the store had stood. He bought it for a pittance from the city. 10 years after that, as the neighborhood began to gentrify, he sold that same lot to a real estate developer for a sum that became the seed money for the Washington family's future success. The foundation of Washington Capital was built, quite literally, on the ashes of Washington and clean community goods. Marcus stared at the document, the truth crashing over him with the force of a physical impact. He had always seen his father's actions as a testament to his resilience, his ability to create value from ruin. But from Clean's perspective, from the perspective of a boy who had lost everything, it was the ultimate act of predatory opportunism. His father's partner hadn't just survived the fire, he had profited from it. Cleaney hadn't spent his life nursing a grudge over a simple tragedy. He had spent his life consumed by the belief that Marcus's entire existence, his wealth, his success, his philanthropy, was a monument built upon the tomb of the Cleaney family. The humiliation at the gala, the malicious compliance at the bank, the sabotage of the Omnicorp deal. It wasn't random prejudice or corporate maneuvering. It was a calculated, deeply personal, lifelong quest for revenge. The fight had just become infinitely more dangerous. Marcus was no longer battling a bigot in a suit. He was battling a man who saw him as the living embodiment of his family's destruction. He was battling a ghost, and ghosts had nothing left to lose. Clean, sensing the invisible net tightening around him, made his next move. It was a desperate, vicious act of preemptive war, designed not to win, but to wound, to poison the well. He leaked his version of the story. It appeared on a notorious financial gossip blog called The Gilded Razor, written by a columnist known for her acid pen and questionable sources. The headline was explosive: "The Saint of Wall Street's Sinful Secret. Did Marcus Washington's empire rise from the ashes of a betrayal?" The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and half-truths. It painted a picture of two families, the salt-of-the-earth Cleaneys and the ruthlessly ambitious Washingtons. It spoke of a tragic fire that destroyed their shared business, a fire from which only one family miraculously recovered. It mentioned, with feigned sympathy, the timely death of Frank Clean, and the savvy real estate deal James Washington made on the very land where his partner's dreams had died. It didn't explicitly accuse the Washingtons of arson or fraud, but it didn't have to. The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. It framed Marcus not as a self-made man, but as the heir to a predatory fortune. His philanthropy, a cynical attempt to launder a legacy of guilt. The story spread through the financial world like a contagion. It was the perfect narrative, a celebrated hero with a hidden dark side. By midday, Elena was fielding calls from reporters at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The board members of the Omnicorp deal were getting nervous again. The carefully constructed public persona Marcus had spent a lifetime building was being systematically dismantled. He was in his study, the Gilded Razor article glowing on his monitor, when Elena walked in, her face grim. "The board at First National has called an emergency meeting," she said, dispensing with any preamble. "They're panicking. The divestment strategy is working. Their portfolios are taking a hit. And now this article has dropped a bomb on their reputation by association. Morrison is demanding a meeting with you." "No," Marcus said, his voice quiet. "No, Marcus. This is our chance to apply pressure, to get them to rein Kline in." "They don't want to rein him in," Marcus countered, his eyes not leaving the screen. "They want to manage the fallout. They'll offer a quiet apology. Maybe move Kline to a different department. They want to bury it. I am not interested in burying it. I am interested in excavating it, right down to the bone." He stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a file. "They've been trying to get my foundation to partner with them on a new inner-city investment initiative for months. It's a PR move for them, a way to polish their image." "You're not seriously considering it?" Elena asked, aghast. "I am," Marcus said. "I want you to call Robert Morrison back. Tell him I agree to the partnership. Tell him I am so impressed by their commitment to community that I will personally appear at the press conference they have scheduled for tomorrow to announce the initiative." Elena stared at him, comprehension dawning in her eyes. A press conference, with all the major financial news outlets in attendance. A live, televised press conference. Marcus corrected her. "Kline will have to be there. As the senior VP in charge of the division sponsoring the event, he'll have to stand on that stage, right next to me, and smile for the cameras. He will be trapped, in public, in a setting of his own bank's creation." "And what happens then?" Elena whispered. Marcus finally looked up from the screen, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, chilling focus. It was the look of a grandmaster who sees the entire board, every possible move, and the final, inevitable checkmate. "Then," he said, "I will burn his world down, and this time, there will be no doubt as to the origin of the fire." The press conference was staged in a sterile, glass-walled atrium at First National Bank's corporate headquarters. It was a space designed for carefully managed optics, with the bank's logo tastefully displayed on a large screen and flattering lighting designed to make aging executives look vital. The air buzzed with the low murmur of journalists setting up cameras, checking microphones, and gossiping about the sudden, high-stakes partnership between Marcus Washington and the very institution he seemed to be at war with. David Kline stood near the side of the stage, a rictus of a smile plastered on his face. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a muscle in his jaw twitched erratically. He had been forced into this. CEO Robert Morrison had made it clear that his presence was non-negotiable. He had to stand there, endorse the man he'd spent his life hating, and pretend this was a glorious new chapter for the bank. He felt like an animal in a cage. Marcus arrived exactly 2 minutes before the event was scheduled to begin. He moved through the room with a preternatural calm, nodding to journalists he knew, shaking hands with a grim-faced Robert Morrison. He was wearing a dark gray suit, tailored to perfection, and a simple, navy blue tie. He looked less like a businessman and more like a statesman. As he walked onto the stage, he passed Kline. He didn't look at him, but he spoke. His voice, a low, private whisper. "You should have stayed in the ashes. David, the air up here is very thin." Clean flinched, as if he'd been struck. The press conference began. Robert Morrison, looking strained but trying for avuncular, spoke first. He lauded the new First National Community Empowerment Initiative, making vague, optimistic promises about investing in the future. He then introduced Marcus, calling him a valued partner and a true visionary. Marcus walked to the podium. A bank of cameras flashed. The red lights on the live television feeds glowed like malevolent eyes. The world was watching. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "Thank you, Robert," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I am here today to talk about community, about trust, about the foundations upon which we build our lives and our businesses." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. 30 years ago, in a small neighborhood in the Bronx, there was a business called Washington and Clean Community Goods. It was built on a foundation of partnership between two families, my father, James Washington, and David Clean's father, Frank Clean. At the mention of his name, Clean, standing behind Marcus, went rigid. Morrison shot him a panicked, questioning look. That business was destroyed in a fire. Marcus continued, his voice steady. A tragedy that sent two families down two very different paths. Recently, a story has circulated suggesting that my family's success was built on the ashes of that partnership. Today, I am here to set the record straight. He reached into his jacket and produced a thin sheaf of papers. This is the official fire marshal's report from that night. It states the cause was inconclusive, likely an electrical fault from a neighboring business. There was no foul play. It was simply a tragedy. He then produced a second document. This is a copy of the insurance policy for the business. A policy that, records show, was allowed to lapse 3 weeks before the fire due to non-payment of the premium. The decision to let that policy lapse was made by Frank Clean, against my father's strenuous objections, in an effort to save a few $100s. A low murmur went through the room. Clean's face had turned the color of ash. My father, James Washington, ran back into that burning building, Marcus said, his voice ringing with a passion that stunned the audience into silence. He saved the store's financial ledgers. In the months that followed, he used those records to ensure every person in the community who had store credit was made whole. He absorbed the debt himself. Frank Clean, devastated by his uninsured loss, was unable to help. My father did not build his success on his partner's ruin. He built it by honoring the commitments his partner abandoned. He let that statement sink in. Then he turned his head slightly, his eyes finding David Clean. But the lies surrounding that night are not the only issue at First National Bank. There is a deeper rot, an issue of professional integrity. He placed another document on the podium. This is an internal memorandum, circulated by Mr. Cleany, encouraging his branch managers to apply enhanced security protocols to clients from emerging demographics. It is a guide to institutional racism, written in the bloodless language of corporate policy. Someone in the audience gasped. The cameras zoomed in, focusing tightly on Clean's face, which was now slick with sweat. These protocols, Marcus said, his voice like cracking ice, are what led to my humiliation at your flagship branch last week. But Mr. Clean's animosity was not just policy. It was personal, and it was encouraged. This was it, the final, devastating blow, the secondary twist. I have here sworn testimony from a junior analyst in your risk management department. It details a series of meetings between David Clean and a senior member of your board of directors, Mr. Arthur Vance. At the back of the room, a portly, white-haired man in an expensive suit, Arthur Vance. Looked as if he'd been shot. Mr. Vance, it seems, lost a significant real estate deal to my company 5 years ago, Marcus explained, his voice surgically precise. He has harbored a grudge ever since. When he learned of Mr. Clean's personal history with my family, he saw an opportunity. He saw Mr. Cleany's pathetic, lifelong vendetta as a useful tool. He encouraged Mr. Cleany's actions, promising him board-level support and a fast track to an executive vice president position if he could successfully sabotage my business dealings and tarnish my reputation. He looked directly into the main television camera, his gaze intense and unwavering. The rot at this bank is not just in the branches. It is in the boardroom. David Clean is a symptom. Arthur Vance is the disease. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Morrison looked at Vance with an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. Vance was already pushing his way toward an exit, his face a mask of panic. Clean stood frozen on the stage, a man publicly vivisected. Every lie, every weakness, every pathetic motivation laid bare for the world to see. Marcus Washington stood calmly at the podium, the architect of it all. He had not raised his voice. He had not resorted to insults. He had simply used the truth, wielded with surgical precision, as a weapon of absolute destruction. The checkmate was complete. The aftermath was a corporate bloodbath. Within the hour, First National Bank stock had entered a freefall, shedding billions in market value. The hashtag #JockBankOfBigotry was trending worldwide. The live stream of the press conference was already a viral sensation, its key moments clipped, remixed, and memed into digital immortality. Arthur Vance was fired before he even made it to his car. A terse statement from the board announced his immediate and permanent retirement for personal reasons. David Clean was escorted from the building by security, a broken man in a bespoke suit, his face a hollow mask of defeat. He didn't even bother to collect his personal effects. Robert Morrison found Marcus in a small, quiet conference room, away from the baying mob of reporters. The CEO looked like a man who had survived a plane crash. His face was pale, his hands trembled. "Marcus," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. There are no words. I had no idea about Vance. None." "I believe you, Robert," Marcus said, his voice devoid of triumph. He felt only a vast, cold emptiness. The victory was ashes in his mouth. "What do you want?" Morrison asked, his desperation raw and undisguised. "Anything. A settlement. A public apology on every network. Name your price. Just tell me how to stop the bleeding." This was the moment Marcus had been preparing for. He opened his briefcase and removed a slim, leather-bound folio. He slid it across the polished table to Morrison. "I'm not interested in your money, Robert," Marcus said. "I'm interested in change. Real, systemic, structural change." Morrison opened the folio. The title page read, "The Washington Protocols, a framework for bias elimination and accountable governance in financial services." He read, his eyes widening with a mixture of horror and awe. It was a revolutionary document. It called for AI-powered bias detection systems to monitor customer interactions in real time. It mandated a complete overhaul of employee training, conducted by external civil rights organizations. It established an independent ombudsman's office with the power to award binding compensation to aggrieved customers. And, most damningly, it tied every single executive's bonus, from the branch manager to the CEO, directly to quantifiable, publicly reported metrics on equitable service. "This," Morrison stammered, "this would cost a fortune. It would change the entire way we do business." Yes, Marcus said. It would. It's either this, or I transfer the remaining $647 million of my assets to J.P. Morgan Chase by the end of the day. And I will spend the next 10 years of my life, and a significant portion of my fortune, funding lawsuits and lobbying for punitive government regulation against this bank. The choice is yours, Robert. Morrison stared at the document, then at the man across from him. He saw no room for negotiation in Marcus's eyes. He was not making a threat. He was stating a fact. Morrison, a man whose entire life was dedicated to the calculation of risk and reward, made the only calculation that mattered. He picked up his pen, a heavy, gold instrument, and signed his name at the bottom of the proposal's commitment page. "We'll start implementation tomorrow," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the new world he had just been forced to enter. Marcus simply nodded, took back the signed folio, and walked out of the room, leaving the CEO to contemplate the ruins of his bank's reputation and the staggering cost of its redemption. 6 months later, spring had come to the Bronx. The air was soft, carrying the scent of damp earth and new leaves. On a corner lot that had stood empty and weed-choked for 3 decades, a small crowd had gathered. They were residents of the neighborhood, local politicians, and a handful of reporters. A large banner fluttered in the breeze, future home of the Washington and Clean Center for Community Entrepreneurship. Marcus Washington stood at a podium, not in a suit and tie, but in a simple polo shirt and slacks. The Washington protocols had become an industry earthquake, adopted under duress by First National. They were now being proactively implemented by a dozen other major banks, all desperate to avoid a similar PR catastrophe. Marcus had become an unwilling icon of corporate accountability. But here, back where it all began, he was just James Washington's son. For 30 years, "This lot has been a scar," he said, his voice carrying over the gentle murmur of the crowd, a reminder of a tragedy. Today, we begin to heal that scar. This will not just be a building. It will be an incubator for dreams, a place for the next generation of entrepreneurs from this community. To get their start, it will provide microloans, mentorship, and the resources they need to build their own futures. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. The foundation of this center is not just concrete and steel. It is the belief that true power lies not in destroying what is, but in building what can be. He stepped down from the podium to warm, heartfelt applause. He picked up a silver shovel and, alongside the borough president, plunged it into the soft earth, turning over the first symbolic patch of ground. It was an act of creation, of rebirth. It was the closing of a circle, a final, definitive answer to Clean's poisonous words at the gala. He was not just rising from the ashes. He was planting a garden in them. Later that evening, back in the sanctuary of his study, Elena brought him his mail. Tucked between financial reports and invitations to other galas was a simple, white envelope with no return address. The postmark was from a small, forgettable town in upstate New York. His name was written on the front in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. He slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of cheap, lined paper, torn from a spiral notebook. The letter was from David Clean. "Marcus, they told me you were building something on the old lot. I saw it on the news. You even put my family's name on it. I don't know why. Maybe for pity. Maybe because, in the end, you really are your father's son. I've had a lot of time to think. Up here, there's nothing else to do. I lost everything. My job, my house, my family. It's all gone. And for a long time, I told myself it was your fault. All of it. The fire, My father's death. My whole worthless life. I see now that was a lie. A story I told myself, so I wouldn't have to face the truth. The truth is, I was weak. My father was weak. We looked at the fire and saw an ending. Your father looked at it and saw a beginning. I hated you for that. I hated you because every time I saw your success, it was a mirror showing me my own failure. The humiliation at the bank. It wasn't about you. It was about me. It was the only way I knew how to feel powerful for a few minutes. I know this letter doesn't change anything. I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that the story is over. My story. You won. I hope you find some peace in that. David. Marcus read the letter twice. The broken words, the pathetic confession, did not bring him a sense of triumph. They brought him something unexpected, something he hadn't realized he was missing closure. The ghost that had haunted him for 3 decades was finally, truly gone. Not vanquished in a blaze of glory, but faded into the sad, quiet reality of a man consumed by his own bitterness. He folded the letter and placed it in a desk drawer. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. They no longer looked like embers. They looked like stars. The war was over. The work was done. He was free.